I came to my senses from my memories and spoke coldly. "What are you doing?" The two people in front of me suddenly froze. After a moment, Jeff stood up and straightened his slightly wrinkled clothes. He looked at me, but spoke to Alexa. "You should leave first." Alexa glared at me unhappily, then got up and left. In the room, only the two of us were left. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Jeff put on that cold expression again. "Weren't you following Dylan? Why did you come to me?" He was still trying to manipulate me with his old methods. If it were Carrie Russell controlled by the original plot, she would have lowered her pride at this moment, apologized, and said she only loved him. She would have tried every way to help his studio, proving that there were things that only she could give him. I raised my chin slightly. "Recently, there is a project in the family company. Originally, it was supposed to cooperate with the Wallach group, but I want to choose you." Jeff suddenly looked up at me. His Adam's apple moved. I smirked. "However, that project has a very long cycle and involves a huge amount of funds. I need to make sure first how much you can handle." Back in the evening, I combined the plot from my previous life and told Dylan what I had heard. I suspect that because of my rebirth, the plot has progressed ahead of time. Jeff has already hooked up with Rick Sewell, the new boss of the underworld in End City. In my previous life, he didn't meet that person until several years later, and with his current power, cooperating with such a person was no different from seeking skin from a tiger. Thinking of this, I furrowed my brows slightly. Dylan, who was originally looking through the contract, paused and looked up at me. That's because Rupert August can no longer help him. I was stunned. For the project in S City, they planted a mole in my company, stole accounts, and created a false impression. Now Rupert August and his men are in prison. He turned over a page of the documents in his hand, speaking in his usual calm tone. Jeff Gardner's company is still in its infancy. He is too weak. He can only rely on others. It suddenly dawned on me. "You orchestrated this." Dylan did not refute, obviously acquiescing. I blinked and threw myself into his arms. "Dylan, you're amazing." He caught my hand, which was wandering around with a teasing meaning, and suddenly changed to a serious expression. "Carrie, you shouldn't get involved in what's coming." "Why?" "Because it's very dangerous." As he spoke, I frowned slightly. Jeff's identity is not as simple as you think. Otherwise, Rick Sewell wouldn't have agreed so readily to cooperate with him. I was suddenly stunned. "You said that in my previous life, I chose the most tragic way to perish with them." Dylan's tone was still calm, but inexplicably cold. "That's because, besides that, I had no other choice. That night, I had another dream. I dreamed of my past life, the 6th year of marriage with Jeff at a certain evening banquet. I saw him standing intimately with Rick Sewell's daughter, Dianna Su, and inexplicably, I became insanely jealous. I lost my sanity and ordered someone to kidnap Dianna Su, only to be taken away by Rick Sewell's men instead. A cold dagger pressed against my neck, tracing down my body. I thought I would die there. In the end, the indifferent Jeff pushed open the door and took me away from the gang. Because of this, in my past life, I always felt that he was only a bit cold on the surface, but still had feelings for me deep down. But, in this dream, like a movie suddenly switching scenes, I saw in another room, Rick Sewell with a scarred face and the expressionless Dylan beside him. In front of them was a large screen, frozen on the scene where a dagger was against my neck. Rick Sewell chuckled softly. "How about it, Mr. Wallach? Have you considered cooperating with me?" Dylan looked at my tear-stained face with his beautiful eyes, without any change in expression. A few seconds later, he looked away. "I agree. Let Carrie leave safely." Rick Sewell smiled with satisfaction. "You are a smart man. Too bad. If you agreed to be my son-in-law, we would have been family." Dylan distanced himself. No need for such fortune. After he left, Jeff and Dianna Su entered through the door. Dianna sighed slightly with regret. "Dad, did Dylan agree to cooperate with us?" Rick Sewell nodded. "He has bad taste. He would rather like that foolish Carrie than marry me." She smiled and glanced at Jeff. "Brother, when are you going to divorce this idiot and marry Alexa?" I suddenly opened my eyes. It was dark, with only a faint moonlight coming in through the window. The scenes from the dream lingered in my mind, combined with other known information, quickly revealing the hidden information from my past life. "Carrie." I moved slightly, and was embraced by Dylan beside me. He held me quietly for a few seconds, speaking with concern. "Yuri trembling." "I know." I closed my eyes, feeling his familiar crisp scent. "I know, Dylan. Jeff is Rick Sewell's illegitimate son. Rick Sewell agreed to cooperate with him now, because they have acknowledged each other as father and son." Dylan didn't care about Jeff Gardner's true identity. He just held me tighter. "What did you dream about?" I wrapped my arms around his slender waist, my voice choked up. I'm sorry, Dylan. I finally understood that in my past life, under the planning of Jeff and the Sewell family, I became a hostage threatening Dylan. The Wallach family's business was forced into the dark. So in the end, Dylan chose to perish with everyone at that grand wedding. Fortunately, in this life, I woke up from the constraints of the original plot. There was still time for everything. When my emotions calmed down, I recounted the scenes from the dream. Dylan's hand behind me suddenly tightened slightly, his voice carrying an almost icy chill. "Dianna Su, huh? I know." Under my deliberate guidance, Russell family quickly reached the first phase of cooperation with Jeff Studios. Rick Sewell also got involved. At this time, it was still early. He hadn't yet dominated the entire S-City like in his past life. So during the project, he left many flaws that were not taken care of in time. All of these were collected by Dylan and would be used as evidence to send him to court in the future. However, Dylan hasn't contacted me in the past few days. That afternoon, I went to his company to find him, and downstairs, I saw a bright pink sports car that I didn't recognize. The car door opened, and a familiar figure walked out. I froze in place. It was Dianna Su, a younger version of Dianna. I saw her briskly walk to the other side and open the car door. Then, Dylan in a suit stepped out, a faint smile on his lips. I didn't know what he said, but Dianna covered her mouth and smiled, taking out something like a letter from her purse, handing it to him. Then she got into the car and left. Dylan stood still, scanning the surroundings. When he passed my car, he paused. I was sure he recognized me, but he seemed as if he hadn't seen anything, calmly shifted his gaze, and went upstairs. A boundless sense of bitterness suddenly filled my heart. So, was this the feeling that Dylan had when he saw me with Jeff countless times before? I pushed open the car door, went upstairs, and found Dylan in his office. He looked up from behind his desk. "Why didn't you knock?" I said sourly. "Does Dianna need to knock when she comes to see you?" Dylan fell silent for a moment, then suddenly stood up and walked towards the adjacent lounge. As he walked, he loosened his tie and unbuttoned 2 buttons on his shirt collar. He stood in the lounge, with his collar half open, looking at me. "Come here." I deliberately dragged my feet discontentedly, slowly walked over, and as soon as I entered the lounge, the door suddenly closed behind me. My back pressed against the hard, cold door, but all I could feel in front of me was the scorching body heat of Dylan. He held my shoulder, his moist kiss leaving traces of water from his lips to my ear, then following the contours of my body inch by inch downwards. Dylan knew me too well, including my reactions, the limits I could endure, the significance of every inch of my trembling body. I felt like I was thrown high into the clouds, then plummeted down into an endless ocean. I could only shiver and call out before being thrown back into the boundless sea of pleasure. In the end, before being completely engulfed by the waves, I heard his hoarse voice, carrying a scorching breath, whisper in my ear, "Have you checked yet? I still belong entirely to you." I looked over the letter from Dianna Su to Dylan several times. It turned out to be an invitation to her birthday banquet. As the main person in charge of the Russell family project in collaboration with the Sewell family, I also received one. "It will be very dangerous that day. I would prefer you not to go." Dylan's glass-like transparent eyes looked at me. "But will you listen to me, Carrie?" I honestly shook my head. "No." Then I quickly added, "Because normally, we are currently cooperating and making good progress. If I inexplicably don't attend the banquet, it may arouse their suspicion." This reason was very valid. Even Dylan couldn't refute it. He looked at me steadily for a while, then leaned over to kiss me again. "No matter what happens, Carrie, remember, your safety is the most important thing." Soon, it was Dianna Su's birthday banquet day. The Russell family's project was actually done in collaboration with the official authorities. So many powerful and influential people were present, and as one of the 3 parties involved, Jeff Gardner also successfully made many connections. I held a glass of wine, coldly watching Alexa Lutz following behind him. As if sensing my gaze, she suddenly turned back, looked at me smugly and provocatively. Then, as if to show off, she took Jeff's arm. "Such a trashy person, you better keep her to yourself." Looking around the venue, among the guests, I noticed many familiar faces. These were all partners that Jeff was supposed to meet several years later in his past life. Was it because of Dylan's proactive approach that everything happened ahead of time? Just as I seemed to have some insight, today's protagonist, Dianna Su, appeared. She was holding Rick Sewell's arm with one hand, and on the other side stood Dylan with a gentle smile. "Welcome everyone to my birthday banquet," she said with a smile, her gaze sweeping over my face, showing a hint of self-satisfaction. A waiter brought out a huge 3-tier cake. She cut the cake, came down with Dylan to chat with the guests, and soon came to me. "Miss Carrie, I hope we will have a pleasant cooperation in the upcoming project." Dianna smiled at me, then suddenly turned to Dylan. "I heard you used to be very close with Miss Carrie, even made a childhood promise?" "It was just a joke from my parents, not to be taken seriously." Dylan glanced lightly at me, then indifferently looked away. "Besides, Miss Carrie already has someone in her heart. We have nothing to do with each other now." Although I knew he was acting, I was still so angry that I almost crushed my teeth. After a while, I disdainfully chuckled. "I should thank Mr. Wallach for finally letting me go." He left with Dianna by his side. I raised my glass and quickly found Jeff near the French windows by the garden. He was on the phone, and Alexa was nowhere to be seen by his side. I didn't know what the person on the other end of the call said, but his expression gradually became serious. Outside the window, in the pitch-black night, the first firework bloomed. Soon, more and more fireworks followed. These were supposed to celebrate Dianna Su's birthday, but they perfectly masked the sound of gunfire from the fierce battle after the discovery of the secret arsenal of the Sewell family not far away. I remembered Dylan's previous instructions and quietly retreated to the corner, step by step. I was about to leave through the garden path. Suddenly, a figure covered in blood rushed in at the front door. "Boss, our deal has been exposed." With a bang, a gunshot rang out, and a huge crystal chandelier fell to the ground, making a deafening noise. The entire hall plunged into darkness in an instant. Chaos ensued. Afraid of being involved, I obediently hid in the corner, watching as the police officers who had infiltrated the banquet subdued Rick Sewell's men one by one. "Carrie." Finally, Dylan's voice sounded in my ear. He came to my side under the cover of darkness and whispered softly, "The power of the Sewell family is deeply rooted for so many years. There may be more tricks later. Let's leave first." I nodded, and the tension in my heart gradually eased. However, just as we avoided the chaotic crowd and walked into the garden, a night breeze carrying an unknown mix of floral scents blew over, and I suddenly smelled something unusual. Like a premonition from a past life, my pupils contracted, and I swiftly pushed Dylan to the ground, rolling to the side. The next moment, where we should have been, a series of bullets stirred up dust all over the ground. I staggered to my feet, only to be targeted by a dark gun barrel. "It's really you." Jeff Gardner held the gun, looking at me with almost hateful eyes. "If you love me, why do you keep sabotaging my career and opportunities for development? If you truly admire me, you should willingly and selflessly devote yourself to me without expecting anything in return. But you claim to like me, yet you only look down on me with pity and sympathy, looking down on me from a high position. Carrie Russell, you make me sick." Even if I were to live again, I was still silenced by Jeff Gardner's shameless words. So in the past life, no matter how good I was to him, no matter how much I helped him, in his eyes, it was still humiliating, because deep down, he felt that when I offered him help, I should not ask for anything in return. "Do I look like a fool to you?" His ridiculous logic angered me, and I couldn't help but speak out. "We don't even know each other. I helped you financially. You should thank me. If you feel insulted, just throw the money in my face, tell me that you can succeed on your own merits, and don't need my dirty money. But you don't. The fact is, even though you have connections with Rick Sewell, you still need to cooperate with me and the Russell family to achieve the projects you desire. Without my help, you would be a useless waste of space." The more I spoke, the paler Jeff Gardner's face became, but he gritted his teeth and said, "You, a carefree heiress since birth, don't understand at all. It has nothing to do with one's background." Suddenly, Dylan lightly chuckled, interrupting Jeff's words. "You only know how to shift blame, complain. Even if you were born into a family like ours, you wouldn't change anything. Just like now, you have acknowledged your father, yet you are still a waste who can only rely on selling your looks for opportunities." His eyes were contemptuous, not hiding anything, but it seemed like he was prepared. In the moment when Jeff Gardner lost his sanity and fired the gun, he suddenly pushed me aside. More than one gunshot. Bullets pierced through flesh, creating a bloody bloom with smoke. A few warm drops of blood splattered on my face. All I could see was a sea of red and his slowly closing eyes. "Dylan." In the ward, the smell of disinfectant filled the air, overwhelming the lemongrass scent on Dylan. I sat by his hospital bed, gritting my teeth. "Do you have a death wish?" His eyelashes trembled as he looked at me with a gentle gaze. "Sorry, Carrie, I just wanted to experiment. After all the efforts we made to break free from the inevitable, will your past fate repeat itself?" This was why he deliberately provoked Jeff Gardner, causing him to shoot at himself. In fact, the undercover police had already noticed the missing person in the chaotic hall and followed them out. At the same moment Jeff Gardner fired, they also pulled the trigger, piercing his wrist and temple. If the original plot's influence couldn't be shaken off, Dylan would definitely die by Jeff Gardner's gun, instead of what happened now, where the bullets successfully veered off course, only injuring his shoulder. "But you have many ways to verify without risking your own life, right? This is the safest way." His lips were pale due to excessive blood loss, yet his gaze never left me for a moment. "If I really die, Jeff Gardner will undoubtedly be sentenced to death. You won't have any contact with him anymore, and you won't be sent to a mental hospital. In the next few decades, you will have a peaceful life of your own, Carrie." He paused for a moment, lowering his voice. His words fell into my ears as light as feathers, yet carried the weight of thunder. "I've said before, I won't let those things in your dreams come true." I stared blankly at Dylan, feeling like my throat was blocked by an invisible force, unable to say anything. He was really a bit crazy, willing to bet his own life on this gamble. If he won, it would prove that we had both shaken off the shadows of our past lives. If he lost, his death could exchange for my peaceful remaining years. I thought of the injections in my past life, of falling from a tall building. I thought of the tears in Dylan's eyes as he looked at me in the dim box. I thought of the flames that suddenly erupted at Jeff Gardner's grand wedding. I thought of the lemongrass scent that had been on Dylan for over a decade. In a surge of tears, I suddenly grabbed his collar, leaned in, and viciously bit his lips. The sweet and metallic taste of blood filled my mouth for a moment. "That won't work either." I said word by word, "Your life belongs to me." "All right, it's yours." The originally cold and indifferent eyes of Dylan were now filled with a moist tenderness. "All that I have is yours." During those days, Dylan tried to establish a connection with Dianna Su to gather intelligence from her. He cooperated with the police to bust a weapons deal involving over $10 billion. Due to involvement involvement in criminal activities such as murder, illegal possession of firearms. Jeff Gardner, Rick Sewell, Dianna Su, and others were sentenced to death. The relationships between all the guests at the birthday banquet and Rick Sewell's underground network were gradually being investigated. Although Alexa Lutz did not have direct involvement in the case itself, she also received a 2-year sentence for providing some assistance. The Russell family's Phase 2 and 3 projects seamlessly continued to cooperate with the Wallach family. Under the guise of work, I suddenly had a lot more time to spend with Dylan. But no matter how he tried to seduce me, I always kept a straight face and refused. Your wound hasn't healed yet. Let's talk about it when it's fully recovered. After saying that, I couldn't help but reprimand him again. You dare to drink alcohol with your gunshot wound still not healed. Do you not want to live? His white shirt soaked with hot water clung to his body, and as Dylan opened his eyes, a hint of intoxication still lingered in his pupils. A tolerant yet helpless smile curved his lips. I'm sorry, Carrie. He was trying to seduce me again. I swallowed hard, pretended to be indifferent, and tossed the shower head to him. Take off your clothes yourself, take a shower yourself. I'm leaving first. In the steam-filled bathroom, I had only taken a few steps when suddenly I heard the sound of a heavy object falling behind me. I hesitated for a moment, but my concern for Dylan prevailed. I turned around and hurried back. In the next instant, as I bent down, he grabbed my neck, and we both fell into a large round bathtub with a bang, splashing water everywhere. I couldn't help but scream. This is a designer dress I just received last week. I'll compensate you with 10 of them tomorrow. His scorching breath was against my ear, becoming hotter bit by bit. Carrie, help me. The kiss was on my lips, lingering and grinding until a slight stinging sensation came, then reluctantly left. But it carried warmth, descending all the way into the water. How can I help you? The suddenly high-pitched trembling tone was completely engulfed by the fiery kiss. It's too hot. Help me cool down. He is a trickster. How could I help him cool down? I could only be led by him, falling together into the damp tropical rainforest. And then a sudden downpour, with a slightly cool touch, flowing into the depths of the river. After tossing and turning until late at night, I finally fell into a deep sleep. In a daze, I actually dreamed again. In the dream, I couldn't distinguish between past and present, because it was a moment before Jeff Gardner appeared. Wearing a high school uniform, I found a love letter written by a boy in my school bag. Then, like a movie scene, the image shifted. It was that boy standing among a few ruffians, smoking, full of malice. What about Carrie Russell? Once I deceive her into going on a date and drug her drink, we can do whatever we want with her. The next day, he was hit by a speeding car on his way to school, breaking his leg. In the pale hospital room, Dylan pushed open the door, looking at him expressionlessly. This is a warning. If you have any inappropriate thoughts again, the next time you get hit, it might be something worse. Then the hospital room door closed. He picked up the phone. On the other end was 17-year-old Carrie's arrogant voice. Dylan, my birthday is coming soon. What gift have you prepared for me? If it's something I don't like, don't expect me to go on a spring outing with you next month. Dylan chuckled, his tone full of indulgence. The gift is already on your desk. You'll see it when you get back from school. Outside the hospital corridor, the sun was shining, and cherry blossoms were in full bloom. A gentle breeze carried the pale pink petals leisurely. It was the beginning of a spring when everything was yet to unfold.